Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's also on the board of Pfizer. So, Dr. Gottlieb, when I heard the mask mandate being lifted on transportation, I thought of my 1-year-old who I don't want to put on a train and I don't want to put on a plane because I can't put a mask on him and he is not vaccinated. What are parents of the youngest Americans supposed to do? Not travel?
Look, this is a really difficult situation because we're effectively saying that people need to take matters into their own hands in terms of protecting themselves. We're no longer applying mandates on the entire population, but asking people to individually assess their own risk, but not giving everyone the tools they need to do that, particularly young kids who now are going to be made vulnerable in these public settings, but there's no vaccine available for those kids. And I know a lot of parents have been waiting a very long time. There's kids with health conditions that can't get the benefit of a vaccine that could provide them some baseline immunity that could protect them from severe disease. And I think we need to try to make a vaccine available to those children very soon. In terms of where this stands right now, I'll take each application in turn. Pfizer, as you know, submitted about 4 months ago the data on their 2-dose vaccine. The FDA's had that data for about 4 months and has had the benefit of reviewing it. They deferred making a decision on that vaccine. They didn't feel it reached the level of efficacy that they had prescribed, which was a threshold of 50% effectiveness of preventing symptomatic disease. And so Pfizer's now testing a 3rd dose to see if that will boost the effectiveness of the overall regimen. And the data from that should be available very soon. Moderna released top-line data on their vaccine on March 23rd, their 2-dose vaccine, and the public reports are they're going to file this week. My expectation is that FDA is going to hold an advisory committee in early June to discuss one or both of these applications. That gives the agency about 6 weeks to review the Moderna application, which is consistent with how long the agency has taken to review these applications. It took them 5 weeks to review Pfizer's 5 to 11 application. And I'm hoping that Pfizer will have all their data in time to also be considered at that advisory committee. But just in closing, if the Moderna application is ready and the Pfizer application is not, I think the FDA would and should consider it separately.
Well, that's an important point to make because there was reporting, as you know, in Politico this week that there were conversations within the Biden administration worrying if you authorize one vaccine before the others that it'll confuse parents. But with adults, one vaccine was authorized and made available before the other. So is that flawed thinking? Do you know if there's any truth to that reporting?
Well, look, I don't agree with the thinking, but when I just look at the timeline that's laid out here, if you believe that they are going to hold an advisory committee in early June, that's been long rumored. That meeting was supposed to be planned to consider a bivalent vaccine, the Omicron-specific vaccine, and the consideration of the childhood vaccine is going to get latched onto that meeting. If you consider that timeline, that gives them about 6 weeks to review the Moderna application, and I believe that Pfizer is going to have their data in sufficient time to also meet that deadline. 6 weeks is about what the agency has been taking. They've been reviewing these applications in 4 to 5 weeks. Having an AdCom does add additional time. It's going to add an additional week or two. The final point I would make is the question of why are they bringing it before the advisory committee? And that raises the broader question here of whether or not the agency is going to consider vaccines that don't reach their 50% threshold approvable. The reason they deferred, at least in part, the reason they deferred the Pfizer vaccine previously is it didn't meet that threshold. So this is going to be controversial before the advisory committee. That's why they're taking it before that AdCom. I hope there's a favorable outcome for one or both of these vaccines, but I do expect there to be some pushback among those members.
When we spoke back in January about where Pfizer was with its submission, you did make the argument that it might be advisable to make just 2 doses available while they looked at a 3rd because some protection is better than none. Is the FDA thinking that way? You mentioned a 50% efficacy rate. If the data isn't meeting that benchmark, should these vaccines still be approved?
Well, the data won't reach that benchmark. The Moderna data is about 40% in the data they released. The Pfizer data, the previous data was about 40% as well. We'll see if the 3rd dose provides additional protection on top of that. But we know these vaccines aren't working very well against Omicron at preventing symptomatic disease. I do believe from a clinical standpoint, there's value in getting baseline immunity into children, even if you're not going to fully protect them against symptomatic illness. if you could protect them against severe disease and hospitalization, that provides a lot of value, especially children who are vulnerable, who have health conditions. So I think for FDA to authorize these vaccines, they're going to have to come to that view as well, because these vaccines are not going to meet their pre-specified target of providing 50% efficacy. We know that right now. I mean, it's possible that the third dose of the Pfizer vaccine will reach that benchmark. I don't think that's going to be the case, because I don't think there'll be enough symptomatic cases in that data set to evaluate.
This is an important conversation. We're going to continue to have it and watch what the FDA does very carefully. Thank you very much. We turn now to politics. The midterm elections, we are just over 6 months away from them. And the question is, will Democrats be able to hold both the House and the Senate? Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us now from Boston. Good morning to you, Senator. I know you have some strong thoughts on the matter. I read your op-ed this week, and you warned Democrats could face disaster because they've promised more than President Biden has delivered. Why do you think Democrats may lose the majority?
Look, Democrats win when Democrats are in touch with the American people and what's happening to them. Today, we've got people who are in the checkout line for groceries and having to pick what they're going to send back because they can't afford to pay for it. We've got millions of people across this country who say they're not ready for their student loan payments to resume, that they simply can't manage those loan burdens. We've got millions of people across this country who can't fill up on a tank of gas so they'll be able to get to work this week. As Democrats, we need to deliver. We need to hit costs head on, and we have the power to do that. We've got less than 200 days left, though, and instead of looking backwards, let's look forward. Let's get done what we can get done for the American people who elected us, for the American people who are counting on us.
Well, Republicans would agree with you. Inflation is a big problem. It's one of their chief attack points on the president. You just mentioned student debt. I know you believe the president can just erase it essentially through executive orders, but both the White House and Speaker Pelosi have said he may not have the authority, that Congress would have to act here. Have you persuaded the White House otherwise?
Look, we know that the president has the authority to cancel student loan debt, and the best way we know that is because President Obama did it, President Trump did it, and President Biden has now done it repeatedly. The power is clearly there, and the need.
Deadlines, you mean there?
No, they have canceled. Remember, they have canceled debt. They've both canceled it for people in certain categories entirely, but they have also canceled the interest that is due on people's student loans. They haven't deferred it, they have canceled it, because the power of cancellation is already in the statute. President Obama, President Trump, President Biden have all done it. And understand, on cancellation, this is something the American people want, and it's something that tens of millions of people need. 40% of the folks who are handling student loan debt don't have a college diploma. These are people who tried, but life happened. Pregnancy, they were working 3 jobs, their mom got sick, they had to move to another city, and now they earn like a high school grad, but they are trying to manage college loan debt, and it is crushing them.
But at the time of...
it's a racial equity issue.
I'm aware with why this is a priority for you, but the concern is at this moment it could also be inflationary in an environment where there already is high inflation.
No, it is not inflationary. Not paying student loans has been baked in for 3 years now. But keep in mind, as President Biden himself says, the way we deal with inflation is not by making people poorer. The way we deal with inflation is we attack high prices head on. Price gouging. We straighten out the supply chain so goods can come into people. We attack it head on, not by trying to make people poorer. Canceling student loan debt is something that would be good for people all across this country, and more importantly, good for our economy overall.
You also, in your op-ed, talk about a number of Build Back Better agenda items, childcare, universal pre-K, but all 50 Democratic senators do not support that. The president himself has acknowledged his problem. He talked this week just about being able to get to the number 48. Are Senators Manchin and Sinema changing their minds here? Do you have any different math?
So look, there are a lot of things on which we all agree, and there are things on which we need to continue the negotiations. Let's just start actually with price gouging. You know, I think all the Democrats are on board that these giant companies should not be not only passing along costs and inflation, but actually adding an extra dollop so they can pad and expand.
But you think this can get
profits.
done in the next few weeks before people leave
Yes,
at Memorial
I do.
Day?
We've got nearly 200 days before the next election. We need to be out there fighting. And what we need to fight for are the things that touch America's families directly. People are counting on us, and we can't just sit back and play politics. We need to be in the fight on behalf of the American people. And that means people who are struggling with student loan debt, people who are struggling with high prices, people who are worried about this pandemic. We deliver, then that's what democracy is about. We can face that election in November with our heads held high.
A few weeks ago, Senator Angus King said if you have a Franklin Roosevelt policy agenda, you need Franklin Roosevelt majorities. He just comes back to that premise of we don't have 50 Democratic votes. So am I hearing you say Democrats just need to get caught trying?
Look, what you're hearing me say, first of all, is that not everything has to go through Congress. We picked the example of student loan debt. That would affect about 43 million people. That matters. It would affect them directly and affect their families. It's also the case that there are many things that we agree on. We can attack corruption head on. I've got a bipartisan plan that says members of Congress cannot trade in stocks. They can't own individual stocks. That's something we should be able to agree on and move forward and help restore just a little faith that when we take actions in Congress, it's not to pad our own pockets, it's actually on behalf of the American people. And look at all the other pieces that the American public tells us.
On transportation, I thought of my 1-year-old who I don't want to put on a train and I don't want to put on a plane because I can't put a mask on him and he is not vaccinated. What are parents of the youngest Americans supposed to do? Not travel?
Look, this is a really difficult situation because we're effectively saying that people need to take matters into their own hands in terms of protecting themselves. We're no longer applying mandates on the entire population, but asking people to individually assess their own risk, but not giving everyone the tools they need to do that, particularly young kids who now are going to be made vulnerable in these public settings, but there's no vaccine available for those kids. And I know a lot of parents have been waiting a very long time. There's kids with health conditions that can't get the benefit of a vaccine that could provide them some baseline immunity that could protect them from severe disease. And I think we need to try to make a vaccine available to those children very soon. In terms of where this stands right now, I'll take each application in turn. Pfizer, as you know, submitted about 4 months ago the data on their
Friday night, after leaked recorded phone calls verified McCarthy telling colleagues shortly after the Capitol attack that Mr. Trump had acknowledged bearing some blame for it.
He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened.
The conversations were released by the authors of a new book, This Will Not Pass, who reported on the internal party discussions.
I've had it with this guy.
McCarthy said he was considering asking Trump to resign in light of potentially being impeached in the Senate.
And the only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation we should resign. I mean, that would be my take, but I don't think he would take it.
McCarthy had called the Times reporting totally false and wrong. That is, until the audio was released, catching McCarthy flat-footed. But Trump told the Wall Street Journal on Friday that McCarthy remains an ally.
And we want to turn now to Robert Costa. Bob, is there going to be any consequence for this?
Inside of the House Republican Conference, his rivals are watching this episode very closely. But based on my reporting, McCarthy is in line to hold the Speaker's gavel should Republicans win the majority. Democrats still believe they have a chance, though, of winning the majority, and they're watching this all very closely. They would still like to see him speak to the House Select Committee investigating January 6th.
Any chance of that?
At this point, McCarthy has defied the committee at every turn. A very little chance of that, but the committee still probing other House Republicans as well.
Well, Bob Costa, thank you very much for your reporting and analysis. We'll be back in a moment. We are joined now by Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, which sets monetary policy, including interest rates, for the 19 countries that use the euro as a currency. Madam Lagarde, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, and good morning.
Good morning. Good to have you back here in Washington. We talk often about inflation in this country, but inflation is also at a record high in Europe. The Federal Reserve Chair has talked about raising interest rates in this country next month by as much as 0.5% to try to get control here. Why do you think you can wait until the summer?
I believe that we share the same resolve, which is to tame inflation, which is to use all the tools that we have to do so. But we're facing a different beast. When I look at my core inflation, which is inflation taking out the most volatile elements, such as energy and food, my core inflation is at 2.9%. Inflation in Europe is very high at the moment. 50% of that is related to energy prices. Pre-Ukraine war, it was already climbing, but the Ukraine war has dramatically increased those prices. So we have to use the tools and the sequence, which is appropriate depending on the sources of inflation. If I raise interest rates today, it is not going to bring the price of energy down. So we have embarked on that journey of gradually removing accommodative monetary policy. So we will be interrupting the purchases of assets in the course of the third quarter. High probability that we do so early in the third quarter. And then we will look at interest rates and how and by how much we hike them. But we have to be data dependent, because of the sources of inflation that we have at the moment.
You have said high energy and lack of confidence could be persistent here. Does that indicate a high degree of concern that we could be tipping into a recession, and can you raise rates without that risk?
It's the trade-off that central bank governors face at the moment. We have to be guided by our mandate, by our objective, which is to restore price stability, which we have all defined as roughly 2%. So that's the mandate. But at the same time, we have to do so in a sufficiently well-sequenced, well-calibrated, for us in Europe, gradual way, so that we don't induce recession. We currently are facing, winds that reduce growth and increase inflation. So we have to navigate between the two, guided by the mandate of price stability and bringing inflation down.
You've referenced the war with Russia a few times here, and we've all been learning just how dependent Europe is on Russia for its supply of fossil fuels. Germany warned an embargo of Russian gas could cause economic output to drop 5%, and yet there are calls for total embargoes on Russian gasoline. I mean, is this practical? And how much is the politics impacting this?
I think we have to be guided by the purpose that we have. And the purpose we have is to reduce and possibly cancel the financing that is provided to Russia to finance the war, the unjustifiable, illegitimate war of Russia against Ukraine. So we have to adjust the policies, whether it is sanctions, whether it is swifting the banks, whether it is cutting out the oligarchs from their assets and their sources of financing, whether it is reducing and eventually cutting out supplies from Russia in such a way that we actually reach the goal we have, which is to reduce financing. If we were to take abrupt measures that would induce an increase of the price of oil or gas around the world, from which the Russians would eventually benefit, then that would not be the right policy move. So we have to do it in sufficiently smart and subtle a way so that we actually achieve the goal that we have, which is to reduce the financing. And I think that's what the Europeans together are looking at. The plan to completely boycott coal has been adopted. There's a lot of work going on concerning oil, concerning gas, and there will be more stories to tell a bit later on.
In this country, there's a lot of debate around how much the government is to blame versus the central bankers for the inflation that we're experiencing. The U.S. spent $6 trillion on COVID relief, $2 trillion of it on President Biden's watch last spring when the economy was already recovering. Do you think some of this spending in the U.S. exacerbated inflation because Europe didn't spend like this?
We in Europe spent less in stimulus, and I think we spent differently. We spent pretty much half as much as what the US government spent on stimulus and heating up the economy. But we also spent it differently because I think the focus was predominantly on keeping the jobs, not necessarily sending the checks. And as a result of that, people who managed to keep their jobs alive while not necessarily going to work because COVID stopped everybody from going to work at some point in time. They had their job. So when COVID was over, they went back to their job. Mm-hmm. So I think that the labor market that you have currently in this country, in the US, which is incredibly tense, where you have a lot of jobs that are not filled, where you have plenty of vacancies. We don't have that in Europe at the moment. And the current situation you have on the labor market here in the US is clearly contributing to possible strong inflation and second round effect where prices go up, wages go up, short supply of labor, wages continue to go up, and that feeds back into prices. That's one of the differences between our two economies.
You've been in key positions throughout a number of economic crises. How dangerous is this moment that we are in right now?
It is a difficult moment, but it's one where very interesting phenomenon developed. If I look from my vantage point at Europe, the Russian aggression against Ukraine has produced three key results. It has resurrected NATO. This is Easter Day, so I'm not fantasizing here, but it has resurrected NATO. It has united the Europeans more than ever, mm-hmm. and it has strengthened a nation, Ukraine. The price of that is terrible. The death, the destruction, the devastation, and we are all concerned and all want mm-hmm. to help. But this is quite an interesting development, and we have to be united and resolved to actually address the situation together because there has to be solidarity.
I have to end it there because we're out of time. We'll be back.